As people are joining us, welcome. And while people are getting settled, I am going to go over this lovely slide here that is so good for ADHD because it is not too busy at all. It's not too wordy. And believe it or not, this is a super pared down summary of the CHAD participation agreement. In a nutshell, all of these events, it's mostly be respectful. If someone comments, be kind. Anything that you learn from the speaker, certainly take out and teach others, talk about it. That's great. Talk about this event itself. That is great. But if there is a discussion with personal information, don't share that at all outside this group. And for those of you who haven't been with us before, we welcome you. And then we encourage you to join us again for other events. We've got a lot of really cool in-person adult group and women's group events at local libraries, and then online, the parent group events. And you can always see the parent group events because they got all the circles. That's the way you can identify really quickly with your eye the parent group events that are coming. So we've got things with anxiety and the paradox of why that kid is just not living up to his potential, and then learning some executive functioning strategies for teens. Those are the next few months coming up. So I am going to stop sharing my slides. Every month before the talk, we promote the podcasts of the upcoming speaker. Mike told her story of how she was PhD student in genetics, didn't quite get to the finish line, was a dance instructor for a while, basically followed the ADHD pathway of getting a job, and she is a coach for executive functions. So welcome, Mike. I am super excited to hear your talk.
Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and get my screen sharing. Yeah, I dropped out of my genetics PhD program because my ADHD was totally unmanaged. But I really love the dense, dry science. So I read a bunch of that stuff so that other people don't have to. So, by the way, if people do want to turn on their cameras, like absolutely no pressure, it does give me the sense of like if people are nodding along versus looking confused, that is slightly useful, but also live your life. I am not the boss of you. So today I'm going to talk about how your brain decides whether to do the thing or not, right? Now, this is only less than an hour long talk. So I'm going to be simplifying, but I'm trying to simplify in a way that is more useful, not less useful or misleading. So like I might say, this part of the brain does X. And what I mean is this part of the brain is heavily implicated in the process of X, along with parts 1, 2, 3. And it also does other things like QRS, right? But the goal is for you to have enough scaffolding to hang additional information on so you can keep learning and build upon it. I feel like understanding the biological basis for some of this stuff really helps us have compassion for our brains, for your kids' brains, and it helps you to continue to learn from scientifically informed sources to make things more approachable. So we're going to talk about the neuroscience. We're going to talk about a metaphor. Spoiler alert, it's a scale. To be a little bit more sort of action-oriented. And then we'll talk about the applications and sort of real-world examples. All right, so if you are a generic organism, right, what are you trying to do? Well, you're trying to make babies, and you're trying to stay alive so you can make babies, right? Now, I'm not going to talk about making babies today. So instead, I'm going to focus on how the brain tries to keep you alive. So how do we stay dead if we are, again, just a sort of generic organism? Well, we want to gain some things and we want to avoid some other things. So we want to acquire things like food, like biologically appropriate temperature, like protection, right? Safety. We want to avoid anything that wants to make us dead, whether that is an enemy or a hungry predator. We want to avoid things that will damage us, even if they don't have it out for us. Like falling pointy rocks, they really don't have it out for us, but we want to avoid them. And we also want to avoid losing the things that we need in order to stay alive. So if we don't have any food, that's bad for staying alive. Okay? So in order to drive us towards the acquire things, and away from the avoid things, right? Your brain is going to make the acquire things feel good and the avoid things feel bad. That's the signal that's happening in your brain. So if you give a mouse a cookie, but he has to go through a maze to get it, a mouse, being a rather typical complex organism, is going to think about a whole lot of factors. One set of factors is about the reward, right? What's the other end of this choice? So things like, how likely are they to get a reward, right? How much of a good reward are they going to get? If one choice leads to a really delicious, yummy treat, and the other leads to like, meh, stale mouse food, right? Like mice predictably go towards the yummy treat, peanut butter, by the way. Mice love peanut butter. And additionally, time to reward. So there's a fancy phrase called temporal discounting, which means now feels better than not now for getting good stuff. So if you offer a mouse a lever where if you press this lever, you get food right now. If you press this lever, you get food in 5 minutes. They press the now lever, right? And humans will do the same thing. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, in addition to thinking about like the rewards that they might get from a particular choice, they also think about things like effort and danger or risk. Now, it's not that mice are lazy. It's that imagine you are a mouse and you're trying to get 50 calories worth of food. Well, if you have to spend 100 calories to get it, that's not good mouse math, right? That doesn't lead us more towards being alive. Similarly, if you die trying to get those 50 calories, that's also not good mouse math, right? So get more of the good stuff, avoid the bad stuff. And then there are other factors, right? Because mice are more complex than like an amoeba, right? They will also take into account things like association. If you have a really good time in one section of the maze and a really bad time in the other, you'll go back to the place where you had a good time. If a mouse is in a novel situation, or if they're roughly equal, they'll choose by random. By the way, humans will do this too. If you have like 2 restaurants nearby, one's a little better than the other, sometimes you go for this one and you can't really say why. That's the brain's way of continuing to explore and sort of stay open. Your internal state matters, right? So if you're a hungry mouse, and you've got one path that leads to food and one to water, you go to food, right? If you are a mouse who's just had a big meal, but you're thirsty, same 2 paths, same rewards. Now the water path looks a lot more appealing than the food path, right? So your internal state as a mouse matters. And then social factors. If you give a mouse a choice between 2 areas and one has a mousy friend and one has like a mousy enemy, they will hang out with their buddies because yes, mice do in fact have friends, it turns out. So let's talk now about rats. We're going to go up 1 on the size scale here. So let's say that you've got like extra good food, maybe peanut buttery food, and then you've got sort of meh food. It's fine. It will make them alive, but it's not especially tasty, right? Rats will predictably eat the delicious stuff because rats are smart little critters, right? Now, if you go into a particular part of the brain and you knock out dopamine, right? Dopamine is used to sort of, among other things, send signals between cells in the brain, right? It helps cells communicate and helps that part of the brain do its job, right? So if you knock out dopamine in a part called the nucleus accumbens, that will not be on a test. In fact, there won't be a test. They still prefer the good stuff, right? Okay, doesn't change their appetite or their perception of flavor or anything like that. And it doesn't change how much they eat, right? They are still the same amount of hungry, right? Hang on to that fact, okay? Now let's take these rats and let's give them a little obstacle to climb between them and the really delicious food. Totally doable, just a little effort. So you've got the meh food, easy to reach. You've got the delicious food, takes a little work, right? Yeah, duh, they go for the delicious stuff still. However, if you knock out the dopamine in that nucleus accumbens, that part of the brain, they stop going for the good food. Now remember, when both the good food and the meh food were equally accessible, what did they do? They said, yeah, I'll take the good stuff. So we know they still like it. We know they're still hungry. But what happens is they compare the effort to the reward, and that part of their brain that does that math isn't firing right because it doesn't have the dopamine, so they don't bother. But guess what? If you put the dopamine back in that part of the brain, they'll go right back to climbing the barrier to get to the food. Their preferences didn't change. Their appetite didn't change. What changed was the way that they evaluated the effort versus the reward, right? Their rat brains didn't feel like it. Put that part of their brain back working again, and all of a sudden, the effort feels worth it, right? Now, imagine, and this might be easier for some of you just than others, that you have like a tasty beverage in front of you, maybe a tea, maybe a beer, whatever, whatever your beverage of choice is tonight. How do you know that you have decided to take a sip? So for me, it's about the time when it like hits my face, right? That's the moment where I'm like, oh yeah, I seem to be taking a sip, right? Now, I didn't ask you like, how do we know what the mouse decided when we talk about the mice or the rats, right? We sort of figure that they decided and did the thing, right? So for this 1 hour, right, when I say decide, what I mean is not like long-term plans for your novel, not like a clever joke or a math problem. I mean what your brain presents to you as this is the path to take, this is the action to take, this is the thing that will be worth it, right? I mean that a brain has reached a motivational state of do the thing or don't do the thing, right? Which soda do you grab instinctively? Do you get out of bed or do you pull the covers over you and roll back over, right? Sometimes I joke that like my brain decided to do something without me. If that feels familiar to anybody, like your brain just decided without you that you weren't going to do the thing or you were going to do the thing, right? So we're sort of separating what you think your sort of higher level, like I have a personality, I think in words self, from what your brain is going to present to you as feels worth it. So these decisions happen whether we're aware of them or not. Some decisions are purely cognitive, right? Like if you solve a math problem, if you solve a word problem, right, with that like verbal thinking, higher order sort of thought thing. On the other hand, many decisions rely on emotional factors and cognitive factors, a combination. Now, I'm guessing your like average Joe would think that like purchase decisions, for example, are mostly a cognitive math problem. I'm guessing that in a room full of people who know about ADHD, you may already have figured out that there is in fact a bigger emotional piece than maybe meets the eye. And in fact, economists who love to study decision making and how we make decisions have estimated that 80 to 95% of purchasing decisions are emotional, right? I think that's a sort of wild statistic that somehow feels absolutely unshocking when we think about the way that we feel when we make a choice, right? So that idea about using thoughts and feelings is called somatic marker theory. Now, somatic marker theory, we'll talk more about in a second, but it relies on something that I need to explain first, which is a word called interoception. So what is interoception? Okay, if you're familiar with the five senses, right? Your sense of touch, of taste, your sense of fashion, whatever, right? That's not interoception. That is exteroception, right? Those are the way that you perceive the things that are going on outside of your body, right? Or I guess with taste, partly inside your body, like you eat a bite of chocolate cake. If you hear a bird singing, if you touch a fluffy bunny, see sparkling light, or smell perfume, right? That's how you sense the world around you. That is exteroception. So predictably, interoception is how you sense what's going on inside of you. So if you are like really full, or if you have stubbed your toe again on the edge of that bed, right? Or if you're not feeling good, or if you're itchy, or if you drank too much of your tea and now you're like, doing a little cross-legged dance, right? those feelings, you sense those things, you know, but it's not because you like smell that you stubbed your toe, hopefully. That would be concerning, right? All right, so that's what interoception means. Now, let's meet some parts of the brain because we're going to talk about how body sensations come up through the brain, how they get used. I'm only going to introduce you to 4 sections of the brain, and I promise I will bring it back around. So don't panic. This is the brain. This one is split down the middle. For clarity, eyeballs would be on this side, ponytail on that side, right? So it's facing, God, I'm so bad at looking right. It's facing my left. It's facing the way the eyeballs face, all right? Now, this little chicken nuggety looking guy deep in the center, he's kind of orange colored here for you. That is the thalamus. So it serves as like a hub and a filter for incoming information, and it passes information to the rest of the brain. Now, if I put the other side back onto this brain and then just kind of ice cream scooped out a piece so you could see not all the way to the middle, we would see this area, which is colored green. Again, it's not actually green. This is just to make it clear for you. And that part is called the insula, right? So you have, because it's not in the middle of the brain, it's one on each side actually. So we've got your chicken nuggety guy, that's your thalamus, right? Kind of deep in the middle. You've got your insula, which is like Leia buns, but on the inside, right? Your anterior insula, right? Anterior just means front. So it's the front part of your Leia buns, right? Processes sensory information, integrates information, and does a whole bunch of other things, okay? Now, another word in addition to anterior for frontal is frontal. Now, your prefrontal cortex is like the front of the frontal cortex, right? So that's the stuff behind your forehead. So if you facepalm, you have found your prefrontal cortex right on the other side of your skull, right? A lot of the sort of human-y things happen in the prefrontal cortex, personality things, decision things. Now, if we really want a little like train, little parade of words, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or if you're familiar, the VMPFC, you know, if you're tight like that, is kind of, it's like if you're like, well, actually, right? If you were to go to be a little pedantic and push your glasses up, you'd be pointing roughly right at it. So that's your, well, actually, VMPFC, right? Ventro means sort of the middle. I'm sorry, no, it doesn't. Ventro means underside. Medial is middle, right? So it's the underside of the middle of the front of the outside. You notice these names are like basically just geography, which means once you learn some of these and get a little bit comfortable with them, right? Once you stop being scared of the fact that they are Latin and that's like not what we talk every day usually, it's kind of convenient because it's not like, well, this part of your brain is John and this part of your brain is red and this part of your brain is 32. Like it's not random, right? So in the beginning, it's a lot of terms, but I think it's kind of cool to start realizing that it's just oh, this is the front of this part. This is the bottom of the middle of the front of this part. I also like to refer to it as like, you know, your well, actually, VMPFC. And the VMPFC is involved in social stuff, morality, values, and more. And then the last area of the brain I want to talk about is your cingulate cortex, which I think is delightful to say. It's kind of like a little mohawk on that. Wait, I can point with my mouse. Here we go. This little guy here, that's your corpus callosum. That's kind of where the two parts of the brain meet in the middle. And so sitting on top of that, like a little mohawk, is your cingulate cortex, which is where, you know, decision-making, pain processing, emotional regulation, things like that happen there. Now, again, if you were paying attention and you have a good memory for words, the anterior of that would be the front. And then if you are familiar with a dorsal fin, right? Dorsal, like on a shark, right? You see them swimming around and they're like, doo-doo, doo-doo, right? Now, for us, dorsal is kind of on the top If you're a shark, it's actually back. So dorsal actually means back because things like rats and sharks look like this as opposed to humans, right? So the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex is the little mohawky guy, the little dorsal fin on the front of mohawk cingulate cortex. All right. Again, it's a word parade, but once you start interpreting them, they're not too bad. Okay. I promise I'm done with the terrifying Latin-y speaking part. I'm nervous that I can only see Kristen and Caroline, but they're still with me and they haven't rage quit. So I'm going to assume that you two speak for everyone. Great. Okay, good. Yeah, perfect. All right. So let's talk through what those 4 wordy named things do, right? So we start with the body. So you have nerves throughout your body and they are constantly sending signals about how they are feeling, right? They have their own little thing that they check for. You have, temperature feeling ones and pressure feeling ones and stretch feeling ones and things like that. So all of that flow of data is coming up to your little chicken nuggety guy, right? Your thalamus. Remember, that's the one that's a hub. So he takes all that information in and figures out what's relevant and what we should pass forward, and then what's irrelevant, and we don't need to worry about that. Your thalamus is the reason you don't spend all day thinking, I do not need to pee right now. I am neither hungry nor thirsty. The air in this room is fine. It's fine, right? You can thank your thalamus for that. So your thalamus is going to decide what's relevant and pass it forward to our labans on the inside, right? The insula. And at this stage, the information is sorted. It's the relevant information. It's still raw data. So the insula is going to give it meaning and emotional valence. I love the idea of emotional valence. It's not a full-on emotion. It's like it has sort of a little connotation, right? So if you have a funny feeling in your stomach and you are looking at your crush, right? That could be butterflies in your stomach. It has a little positive flavor to it. If you are about to go in for an interview at work and maybe it turns out your big project was totally on the wrong topic, that funny feeling in your stomach, you might say your stomach dropped, right? It has a negative valence to it. So it's like a tint, if you will, just an emotional yay or oh. These feelings are somatic markers, meaning put a point in the pro or the con column, right? Like keep track of good thing, good thing, good thing, or like scary, scary, scary. So the insula is responsible for you feeling the feelings that were previously just physical sensations. Now it's going to pass those feelings to your prefrontal cortex, right? That's your face palm. Prefrontal cortex, particularly the VMPFC, the well actually right here, is going to take those feelings and place them in the context of your mind, if you will, your experience, your knowledge. At this stage, we have properly formed emotions. So, example, if it's your birthday and your bestie took you out for a movie and has been really funny about the timing and like, there's a lot of cars around your house as the two of you pull up and people jump out when you open the door, you're probably delighted. If you are in your murder basement and you're supposed to be home alone and people jump out when you open your basement door, you probably don't feel delight, right? There's a feedback loop that takes into account our context. Now, have you ever wondered why the hairs on the back of your neck stand up when something is scary? It's because you have magic danger sensors. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It is not, in fact, magic danger sensors. It's that your brain is constantly processing data. And when it thinks that there is something worth paying attention to, right, that data goes all the way up to the prefrontal cortex, sends information back down to the body, right? Hey, let's widen the pupils a little. Let's maybe raise the heart rate a little, right? And information comes back up. My heart is pounding. Have you ever had the experience where like you had too much caffeine and you feel anxious and then you realize it's just physical, but it feels like something more, right? These are those somatic markers, and you get this feedback loop that gets louder and louder and louder until either it becomes irrelevant, the thing resolves, or until you act on it, or until your friends jump out and yell, surprise, happy birthday. So again, somatic is of the body, right? Markers just keeping track, and you get this loop, and it's really quick, and it's really subconscious, right? You don't decide to feel an emotion. You don't decide to notice that a tag is itchy. It's just your brain and your body working together, passing information really quickly to keep you alive. So whether you want to feel your feelings or not, your PFC, that's this guy, is going to pass this emotional and cognitive data along to our mohawk, and specifically the dorsal fin of our mohawk, right? So that is your cingulate cortex. And the dorsal fin of that mohawk is going to weigh out each option. You open the fridge and there are a plethora of things in front of you. And if you go to grab something before you have formed a plan, right? What it's doing is it's figuring out, okay, for each outcome, let's look at one outcome. How good or how bad is the outcome? How likely is the good outcome? How likely is the bad outcome, right? Your brain is doing this really cool, very quick sort of math, right? And so for that first option, that first action that you might take, it's going to pass it even more forward actually in the cingulate cortex. And that part is going to weigh the different options against each other, right? Based on the total overall goodness and badness. And that final decision, right, of what your brain has said, this is the most likely thing to get me the most alive and the most undead, right, is going to get like passed forward. Oop, unless I click too fast and then I break your brain. I didn't break your brain. Right? So let's imagine for a moment that you have damage to the prefrontal cortex, right? So we have these body sensations, we have the emotional valence, we have the cognitive data, we combine it all, we pass it forward, and we calculate what choice is going to feel right or wrong. There's a really famous case study about a patient who had a tumor removed from his PFC, his prefrontal cortex. His intelligence wasn't impacted at all. He could do math problems. He could, talk about themes. He could write, whatever. But he lost the ability to integrate feelings into his decision making. And what is wild about this is that he could go on at length about the rational implications of, should we meet on Tuesday or Wednesday? He could talk for ages about that, but he couldn't decide on one. Picking a restaurant could take hours because he couldn't feel which one felt right. He actually went bankrupt after a series of bad financial decisions. He couldn't access that gut feeling. We talk about gut feeling. It's rather almost literal, right? It really is about communication between body and brain. And he lost the ability to combine those things. So our actions are led by our feelings, our decisions, what we feel like doing, right? It's not a choice we make. That's a reality that we need to account for as we understand how our brain works. So most of you probably don't have kids who have had chunks of their brains removed, probably have a normal for ADHD brains. So these parts are all there, but they are a little behind. And these systems can be a little bit weaker in ADHDers even throughout life. So your kiddo has these feelings, they get incorporated, they weigh the options, and then once that cingulate cortex compares the options, right, the output of all those calculations is motivation. Ta-da, yay, motivation! But I don't mean motivation like Tony Robbins, like, hey, be motivated. I don't really know how motivational speakers sound, but I don't mean like that. What I mean is the thing that your brain has decided will keep you alive. Sorry, cat interruption. So like when it's cold out and you just turn off the alarm and roll back over under the covers, you are motivated to do so. When you see a stressful email from your boss and you close your laptop and you walk away, you are motivated to do that, right? That's what your brain has decided will keep you alive. Now, obviously, it doesn't have direct accuracy in today's world. Ignoring your boss's messages might not actually keep you the most alive and the most safe and the most fed, but that is what your brain feels like. Now, this process is automatic and reflexive, right? It can be over like milliseconds. And it's based on that one of those two prime directives, right? Which is stay alive. We can think with our internal monologue. We can talk in circles, right? But the one that our brain decides is best is the one we will feel like doing. And the bigger the feelings attached, the stronger that motivation will be. So as I go forward, I'm going to talk, for simplicity's sake, a lot about how do you get motivation to do something, right? Sometimes that also means removing motivation to do something else, right? So like if you are presented with two choices and one is really fun and not what you value long term, maybe taking that away is an easier way than trying to make yourself or your kiddo choose the unpleasant thing or the less fun thing, right? Now, I think this loop is really cool. I think it's really helpful for understanding and being compassionate, understanding like, yes, feelings happen. I don't choose to have them. They do affect me. They do affect what I end up doing when I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing, etc. But it doesn't yet give us a path to action. So let's shift to a more sort of metaphorical way of looking at it. So imagine, if you will, like a scale, right? And I know this graphic is really convincing, but it's not actually an image of what happens inside your head. Don't be fooled. So a data point comes in to our complex system here, and it gets evaluated for feels good or feels bad, right? If I'm thinking about a particular thing, each of those types of data, right? A point in the pros, a point in the cons. But then it also gets magnitude, right? So like if there is a factor that is really important to you or really salient, right? Really immediate, that's going to have a different impact than something that like you don't actually care about, right? All these data points get sorted, they get a sense of magnitude, and they get weighed, right? Do the thing, don't do the thing, right? How much do you want to do the thing? And then again, that will be compared against other options. This means two things. Number one, feelings matter, right? Your purely cognitive knowledge can help you discuss the different options, but it's not where you get motivation from, right? You got to get your emotions on board to get motivations. Cats are full of emotions right now. Number two, we need to consider both like the sides of the scale for doing a thing and not doing a thing, right? In addition to the other things you could be doing. So like if you have a cinder block on one side, then a few bouncy balls of novelty are not going to work. And then we wonder, well, how come? Well, because there's the yes and the no of each option. Okay. All right. So what kinds of data points go into this process? You remember how mice make choices, right? They think about properties of the rewards. They think about effort and danger and risk. And then they have other factors like friend time or random choice. Right? So how do humans make choices? We have a lot of the same things, unsurprisingly. We have a few things that are notably different. So interest level. If something is shiny to us, it is easy. That doesn't necessarily mean like we think it's good long term. We mean it catches our brain as shiny, right? If it's boring, it's terrible. For effort required, I think it's worth noting that physical, cognitive, and emotional effort are all real effort. We will talk more about that in a second. I'm going to say it louder for the people in the back. All three of those types of effort are effort. They all get considered. Another type of data point is cost. Financial cost, sure, but also like opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is what could you invest in if you didn't spend money on X? Or what could you do with your time if you don't do thing Y, right? And then, of course, we also have cognitive biases. We've got our values, our morals, and more, right? Humans are really complex. I haven't ever asked a mouse if they have like values and morals or cognitive biases, but I think it's safe to assume that these things do happen in humans because we've seen it. So let's walk through an example. So let's say that this is appropriate doing this from home. This was less of an appropriate example when I gave this talk in person one time, but let's say that I see a cat and its belly looks super soft, right? Things that I, as a generic human, might take into consideration, like, okay, reward type things. Well, it's a soft belly. I like touching soft things, right? Do you have a positive or negative association with cats? Do you like have confidence in your ability to read a cat's body language, right? Are you a cat novice or a crazy cat lady? What's the cat's body language saying if you do understand it, right? Etc. So those are the types of things that you might consider. So I'll walk you through like my personal examples so we can kind of see it in action. So I think soft bellies are wonderful. That's a pro. I like cats. That's a pro. Now, let's say I don't know this cat. Maybe that gives me a little hesitation. I'm a crazy cat lady, so I feel good reading a cat's body language. I can tell when a belly is a trap. This cat looks like it's living its chill life, right? And then, maybe there's a mental cost. If I stop and pet this cat's belly, will I be distracted and forget the thing that I was supposed to be doing? Yes. The answer is yes. Now, if we give those things a sense of magnitude, and I didn't pile them all on the scale so you can read them, right? But it's a chill cat. I like cats. Smaller hesitation around I don't know this cat. Bigger hesitation around I am busy. I need to hold stuff in my head. And despite all of the evidence in my life, I do not actually have a moral code to always pet a cat's belly. So that point just goes right neutral in the middle. Now, I, being a self-admitted crazy cat lady, I have never thought to myself like, I really meant to pet that cat. I was gonna, and I just didn't get around to it. I wanted to, but I just couldn't get started, right? That phenomenon is referred to as the action intention gap. So I love this comic. On one side, you have a stick person with best intentions ever. On the other side, you have super awesome outcome. But in between them is the flaming gap of blah, maybe later, right? To understand why this happens, we need to compare an ADHD, are we going to do the thing scale, with a neurotypical, are we going to do the thing scale? So let's start with, there are many, many possible factors as we discussed, right? Let's start with like 3 examples for a hypothetical thing that we maybe should do, and how we feel. I'll talk about things that motivate us and talk about how our ADHD might rob us of some of the impact of the reward factor. So on the pro side, we could start with intellectual knowledge of the reward, right? AKA, do you know that you should? And the ADHD tax here, actually, we do just fine here. We are no less clever than the population as a whole. So for instance, I mentioned temporal discounting, right? Which is the fancy way of saying now having good things feels better than future having good things. So, a really cool example is if you give kids with and without ADHD a hypothetical problem like, okay, let's say that I had cookies and I could give you 1 cookie now, or I could give you 2 cookies tomorrow, right? ADHD and non-ADHD kids will give you pretty similar answers as to like how many cookies it would have to be willing to wait for it to be worth it, basically. That sort of curve we call the temporal discounting, as in 100 cookies today is not as good as 100 cookies tomorrow is not as good as 100 cookies today. It's kind of a discounted value. Right? Now, if we go on to the next one, emotional connection to the reward, another factor here is that feeling of reward. So like if I hold up a Reese's peanut butter cup for myself, I don't have to tell myself that I like it. I feel the goodness of eating a Reese's peanut butter cup, right? Now for ADHD, we have stronger temporal discounting. So remember those kids in that hypothetical thing? You bring out a tray of cookies and you say, you can have one cookie today, or how many cookies would it take tomorrow for it to be worth waiting? And their answers change. When it was hypothetical, ADHD kids and non-ADHD kids gave the same answers. When it's real, all of a sudden that emotional connection to the reward, we see that it's different because now it's not cognitive. Now we're feeling it. And now feels much better than not now, if it's a good thing. And if it's a bad thing, now feels much worse, right? The emotional impact of like delaying the thing that they want disproportionately affects our experience of a reward. You've seen it, like long-term rewards feel absolutely useless, right? When you're having an ADHD moment or for a kid, right? That's what's going on here. Additionally, we shortcut this language a lot. We say we don't have enough dopamine. Honestly, the science behind that is complex. But whether it is a lack of dopamine, whether it's trouble accessing it, whatever, our dopaminergic neurons, which is just the ones that use dopamine, right? They don't behave the same way as our neurotypical counterparts. That means we often don't anticipate the experience of doing something, and we don't learn in the same way from reward and punishment. So has anybody ever like had a thing that you knew would be fun, but you didn't really feel like going? You didn't really want to go. You knew it'd be fun, friend's party or whatever. And like, yeah, I know it'd be fun. I should go. I said I would go. I don't really feel like it, right? Versus like something that you actually feel like doing. Notice how different those feelings are and which one you're more likely to do. Now, can you think of an example where you went anyway? And sure enough, it was exactly as much fun as you knew it would be, but you didn't want to go. You didn't feel like going. That's that failure to correctly anticipate the reward. So one of the things dopamine does, right? We talk about it as the reward chemical, but people think of that as like, at the end, it's like the medal I get when I do the thing. It's actually more like the carrot at the end of the stick when you've got a donkey, right? You're trying to get it to walk. It's that I see the reward. I believe the reward. I feel the reward, right? That's why it matters for this. So when you don't feel how something is going to feel, that's dopamine not sending the message in the way that would be most useful. Now, another factor that we might consider as we're deciding whether to do something is self-efficacy. That is simply the belief that like, I can do the thing, to oversimplify slightly. Now, with ADHD, many of us, even as adults, we are told that if we're not doing it like June Cleaver, right? Or for your kids, like other kids in class, we believe then we're not doing it right. And we get a lot of advice and feedback and helpful hints and comparisons, and we internalize that. We totally buy into it. And additionally, we lose confidence because we try for a long time to do things in ways that work for other people. They make perfect sense. Common sense says, and we fail, right? So we have these memories of past failures. We have these internalized ideas of normalcy that we're comparing with. And this erodes our sense of self-efficacy, the belief that if we try to do something, it's gonna work out. So we have less like yes to put in the should I do the thing bucket. Okay, now I know so far this is like a real bummer. Gee, thanks, Mike. We know ADHD is hard. But this is the reasons why these things are harder than maybe it seems like they should be. So we have a few more slides on hard stuff. And I want to be clear, it is not to bring us all down and say like, yep, your kids are going to have a hard time. We know. It's so that we can understand why it's hard and how it's hard. And that it's perfectly ADHD normal for this stuff to happen, and how we take it into account, right? If an excuse lets us off the hook, a reason is something we can take into account to move past. And that's what I'm trying to give you here so that you can understand what's going on when your kid makes choices that baffle you, or when you make choices that baffle yourself, right? So stay with me, a few more hard slides, and then we'll get more action-oriented. Why tonight? Why are we crazy tonight? Because why not, say the cats. All right, so if we take those like do the thing data points that we talked about, right? Intellectual knowledge of reward, emotional connection to the reward, and self-efficacy, right? And we remember those little ADHD taxes, not on the first one. We know that the reward is good. We understand with our intellect, but we take a little off on the emotional side. We take a little off on the self-efficacy side, right? That's kind of the yes picture that we are looking at. So let's look at the no side. Because here we don't have like bits being taken away. We have bits being added on into the no bucket. So for all humans, cognitive effort is, when something is tiring or hard. Now, most of us appreciate that hard things are hard. Well, duh. But most of us discount the fact that effortful things are hard. It's actually not often, if you think about it, the most intellectually difficult homework that gets the most pushback. It's the boring homework that gets the most pushback, right? That has massive amounts of resistance. Imagine I asked you to bring me the remote control from across the room. Sure, no biggie. Now imagine I asked you to walk 2 miles to pick up the remote for me. Let's say I could pause time. Let's say that your time was not an issue. It would still not feel like a no biggie sort of an ask, right? Now, it's not hard. I'm not asking you to like race the state track champion, climb a mountain. It's just a few steps, and then a few more steps, and then a few more steps. But it feels like a big ask, right? The thing about hard things, right, that are difficult is that we can actually kind of enjoy sometimes the challenge of those. It is the emotional effort of not quitting, of continuing through a thing that just goes on and on. And of course, for ADHD, we have the bonus add-on here that our mental stamina is especially taxed by working memory challenges. This is real common in ADHD, and it pops up in more ways than I could talk about in an hour. Working memory is their ability to hold information, turn it around, and work with it inside your brain. That's different than your long-term memory, right? Like, what's your mom's name is different than working memory. So let's say that if you're going to write an email and you have to envision how multiple different people are going to interpret it, right? And how they're going to respond to it. And you have to remember all the context, and you have to remember like what the points are you wanted to make. That's a big working memory challenge. For your kid, if they have to remember all the pieces of, like, let's say the instructions for an assignment and how the information is, like how the assignment is supposed to be done, and the material that they learned about it and what they want to say about it, they have to hold all that in their head at once. That's a working memory challenge, right? Give you another example. Maybe this is your kids, or maybe this is me. You decide. If they have to like remember what they're doing, let's say taking out trash and thinking about the best procedure for like opening the bin while touching it as little as possible without snagging the bag, and remembering that they need to go inside and wash their hands before they do something else. And then they think about that thing that their sibling just said and what they're going to say back, right? That's working memory. No wonder they forgot to put another bag in the trash can. It's perfectly reasonable that I forgot to do that. Right? The more pieces that we are holding in our brain, the more likely we are to drop some of them, right? I like to imagine dipping my hands into like a big old like pile of, like balls, like big, I don't know, baseballs or something. And trying to hold them and trying to do stuff with them, but without having any of them roll off onto the floor. The more our working memory is going to be challenged, the more reason our brain has to say, that thing will not be worth the reward. No, thank you. Right? Our working memory is real hard for us. Okay, emotional discomfort and pain. First thing I got to say here is that emotional pain is just as real as physical pain. Socially, we don't tend to give it enough credit. But remember that your brain wants you to stay alive, right? Not dead. And taking damage makes you closer to dead. So whether like you get a cut on your hand, or whether you feel like somebody is disappointed in you, your brain perceives a threat. Your brain perceives a damaging event and will try to avoid anything that it guesses is going to be a damaging event. This is not ADHD. This is all brains. This is how humans behave. ADHDers, we have more of than our fair share here because we are more likely to have comorbidities like anxiety, depression, learning disorders. Also, we're likely to like add on there from growing up in a neurotypical world with neurotypical expectations, right? I'm guessing that in a parents group, most of you have probably heard the statistics on how much more criticism ADHD kids get than their neurotypical peers. It's massive, right? Another ADHD add-on here for the no bucket is ADHDers are so much more intolerant of boredom. Most of you can probably picture quite vividly a kid who can't sit still through a whole meal, right? And you've probably noticed it's not that they don't want to, it's like they can't, right? Like imagine if your brain had mosquito bites all over it. It is too itchy to ignore. You have to do something about it. It doesn't matter if it's going to help or not. You can't not, right? That's how boredom intolerance feels. Now, if you're wondering what it looks like when you outgrow the physical hyperactivity piece of that, watch for somebody who can't watch an entire episode of a show that they like without using their phone or knitting or something else. Ask them to just sit still and do nothing else and just watch a show, right? That boredom intolerance, we cannot be bored. Can't do it, right? It's not damage, but it's discomfort. And that's why this says emotional discomfort and pain, because the brain will go to great and sometimes ridiculous lengths to avoid it. Now, if you recall opportunity cost, what could you do if you don't do this thing, right? Like if I don't work on homework, I could play Legos. That sounds way more fun. Flip side of our beautiful flow state brains, our interest-based nervous system, that feeling of like, firing on all cylinders because we're fired up about something, is that stopping it or even turning it down feels super bonus extra lousy, right? If you ask me to stop working on my taxes to clean out the litter box, okay, fine. You ask me to stop playing Tears of the Kingdom so that I can clean out the litter box? No, absolutely not, right? Same task, different internal context, because the opportunity cost that is present in my brain is very different, right? I'm guessing you've all seen like meltdowns over trying to transition a kid out of something really fun, like let's end screen time, right? That same thing is at play, even when they're not doing the fun thing yet. It just feels real in their brain as a possibility of something else they could do. Okay, so those are our sort of cons. Oh, that's funny. I didn't realize it was showing you my mouse. Sorry if I have been distracting you with my little mouse wiggles. Yeah, so those are the cons side of things. Now let's give them a little bit of magnitude here. So cognitive effort, more than our fair share. Emotional discomfort and pain. Let's say maybe this isn't a particularly emotionally laden task. And let's say there's nothing super fun pressing on our brains, but like we would still kind of rather do something else, right? if we combine those, right, and we compare our pros and our cons, our sort of neurotypical brain here on the right and our ADHD brain on the left, right? None of those differences, none of those data points were that different in magnitude, right? But the point is how they add up. Your neurotypical brain is going to produce an outcome of like, yeah, do the thing. They don't have to trick themselves. They don't have to like, read 10 books on how they can like just do it. Think of the thing and do it. Cool. We, on the other hand, have a bucket of no and just a little pile of yes. And we are not going to whimsically do the thing we should do. We're not going to just happen to do it, right? In this particular example here, right? Now, if we ended the talk here, I would have to like change my name to Eeyore and pin a tail on myself. So we're not, that is not the end of the story, right? But we need to understand the problem before we tackle any solutions, right? So let's, pun incoming, let's tip the scales in our favor. All right. So let's say that you have a task or your kid has a task that is nearly neutral. It's just not shiny. It's just not fun. I think folding the laundry is sometimes a good one for this because it's not really off-putting. It's just not interesting. No big shame around it, potentially, right? If things are going well, like it might not be a big deal, right? But it's not something that they are drawn to. They won't spontaneously feel motivated to do it necessarily. And that motivation, remember, is the feeling that generates action, right? So they're not going to spontaneously do it. Now, this is where, if we want to get to do the thing, we can add a little bit of yes. So we could put on music, right? Like my mom always used to put on really good high energy music Saturday morning when it was like time to clean the house. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized that she was doing that for her ADHD brain. I thought it was for us. It worked though. Right? We could make it a little bit competitive. Which one of you can fold your clothes the fastest, right? Like things like add interest, make it more pleasant, add a challenge, right? Those things that we've heard and that sometimes seem to not work and sometimes seems to work, right? When you just need a little fuel to like get going, there's not really a problem. We just haven't felt like it. We have lack of feel like yes, right? Now, when do these strategies fail? They fail when we have a boulder of no and a little bucket of marbles of yes, right? It would take a mountain of marbles. It would have to be a lot of challenges and fun music and a pleasant candle and a promise of a cookie at the end. It would have to be a really, really good cookie if this is a really off-putting task. So this is where we start really problem solving. The first thing that we can do is we can the opposite of add. We can remove some of the weight on the don't do the thing side, right? If you ever have a chance to hear, Dr. Michael Felt has a great talk about the ambiguity, avoidance, anxiety cycle, how those like they'll just toss you right from one to the other. Really great. But I want to be clear that ambiguity here isn't just like lacking an answer. It's often a sense that like, I don't know what I don't know, right? That's a very difficult thing to start. I have a number of ADHD coaches that I talk with on the regular, and getting clarity is like 95% of the time, it is step one, right? Make it concrete. You can have your kid talk through each step of the process so they can identify where is it that the uncertainty is lurking, right? One of my favorite drills for kids, for adults, for me, is write down all the things you don't know about something. So like, let's say that you're having a party and you got to plan the party and there's a bunch of things you don't know. And it feels like it's just swimming around your head. I don't know how this, right? Go through and list all the things you don't have. That's step one. Step two is not to solve them. Step two is to write down how you could solve them. This builds some emotional distance between you and the problem solving, you and the problem, right? and it redirects your brain back towards a sense of agency, right? I don't know the answer, but actually I know how to find out. I do know how to find out. I don't know the answer. I know how to find out, right? What that does is we're taking this ambiguous thing, or we just don't know, right? And making it solvable problems with actions. Another way to chip away at the no is to help support working memory. For like adults or young adults, this might be like having two monitors. Having two monitors sounds really straightforward, but think for a moment about, I look at this, I realize I need a piece of data. I go to a different tab. I get that piece of data. I go back to the first tab, holding that data in my head. I find the spot where I was. Do I still have the data? Maybe. Cool, I put it in. Now I do that like 6 to 10 more times for this one thing. It's not hard, but it is effortful. And guess what? Our brain, if it perceives that effort, if it sees it coming, is like, no, thank you. I think I will avoid that thing, right? So that could also mean using a template, right? Having an example of something nearby. You know, for kids, a really nice way to do this is to have a photo of what a clean desk looks like taped above their desk, right? Working memory would be pulling what a clean desk looks like, going through each of the categories, comparing what they're seeing, then problem solving for where to put the thing that's out of place. A lot of those processes are supported by just having a picture, right? Aha, this is different. Okay, now I just have to solve for this. Okay, what else is different? Spot the differences. Aha, that's different, right? You notice how much less cognitive effort that is when working memory is supported. This is also where lists come in handy, and I think neurotypical advice around lists makes ADHDers really like resent and push back against the idea of list or planner. Oh my God, if somebody had said planner to me one more time when I was a kid, don't think about lists in this case as like long-term storage or as a motivator. They are to help you think and help your working memory be able to deal with information without dropping things. It's like an external little bit of RAM for your brain, right? Writing down parts of a task or what items you need to grab when you get back to the shed, right? Before you come back in. It's an external short-term memory aid in this case. There are other uses, but I think being really specific about what the point of a list is makes it a lot less annoying. Okay, so supporting working memory. Overwhelm. Overwhelm is another really big one. Overwhelm and ambiguity, they often go hand in hand. So I would say start with clarity, but if you are still stuck, consider like biting off a smaller piece to nibble on. So like, I can't clean my whole room. No, not in an instant. No. But if you can make it so that you can see a goal, you can see an end of a process and start to feel more reachable than like all the way to the end of clean room. So you can limit scope by limiting subject matter. Okay, yeah, can't clean all the room, but like, what if we just pick up all the clothes off the floor? Let's start with like one thing. When all the clothes are up, we win, right? Or what if we clean for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, right? If your term paper feels like too much, well, what if you just read articles for 30 minutes to see if a topic catches your interest? And then we can reassess. That doesn't have to be the end. I really like the idea of like, we do this much and then we reassess and we decide, right? Now, obviously all these things are like chipping away at the no, right? But honestly, sometimes there is a limit to how much suckitude we can remove from a task. So what if instead we make the suckitude matter less? So maybe this has never happened to any of you, but let's say that you needed to call the bank about a charge that bounced. In my early adulthood, I was very familiar with this particular example. Now you can break it down. Okay, I'm just going to start by looking up the phone number of the bank. Cool, I have hit the numbers into the phone, but I haven't hit dial. right? But at some point I have to just hit the button to like dial. If that step is too much, let's provide some counter resistance, right? It's like putting springs underneath one side of the scale. Technically the boulder still weighs as much, but it feels less heavy. Now, fun fact, and I think human brains are magical and weird and wonderful. Human physical contact modulates our perception of pain. In plain English, when you're sick and somebody like rubbed your back and it kind of made you feel a little better, it didn't reduce your fever in that moment necessarily. It didn't kill any viruses, but it changed how your brain perceived pain. And it's true for social connectedness as well. So when you feel like you've got somebody on your side, by your side, you are more able to tolerate pain than when you feel alone. I think that is bonkers and wonderful. So if you want to make yourself less sensitive to the psychological pain associated with something, right? Or if you want to help your kid be able to face something that is really hard, emotional support is a valid and biologically based tool. I mean, think about shame. The whole purpose of shame is it is trying to signal us that we are in danger of being cast out by our fellow humans. And if that happens, we're getting eaten by a tiger, right? Humans are very squishy, and groups are our number one survival mechanism, right? Human connection sends the signal that we are safe, we are protected, we are not about to be cast out to be eaten by a tiger. So for teenagers and older kids, this might mean like having a friend on mute on Zoom while they do something hard, right? It can mean study groups. It could mean silent parallel play, right? If you're reading in the same room where your child does homework and clear detail here, and they know that you're there because you support them, right? They feel, right, regardless of what you feel, if they feel like you are there helping them feel supported, loved, protected, right? Like you're not doing the work for them. You are helping them to face the work, helping them to start the thing that their brain says, run away, it's gonna eat me, right? So I think it is wonderful that we can in fact cheat by pushing the scale up from the bottom, as well as taking away the no, and as well as adding the yes. Because I think this whole, the whole scale is rigged anyway against ADHDers, as we've seen, right? If we're gonna get over that action intention gap, right, flaming gap of blah, maybe later, right, we have to get our cognitive and our emotional processes on board. So we make ourselves less vulnerable, we feel brave, we get ourselves back able to be on the yes side, right? So, conclusions here. Motivation is not what you think you should do. It is not what you know is important, right? It is your brain's way of telling you what it has decided based on cost-benefit analysis, right? Interoception, which is misspelled here, is your way of perceiving your body's internal data, right? You're not hearing, you might hear that you stubbed your toe. That's a bad example. You might not hear that you're hungry. No, that's a bad example too. You might not hear that you have a headache. That feels true, right? But you still know it because your body is sending information up to your chicken nugget, your thalamus, right? And when you have body sensations, they get an emotional valence. Now they're feelings. We add cognition, and now we have emotions, and that is automatic, right? So if we want to get to something that we're stuck on, right, it's really helpful to understand why we are motivated to do it and why we're motivated not to do it. And as a reminder, also thinking about like what else might we be wanting to do instead that's just a much stronger draw, right? There is a towards and there is an away. And both those bodies of evidence are worth considering if you want an effective solution. So, I don't think that if I could like go give a talk in person, right? I don't decide that I will do a better job of speaking if my palms are less dry, right? That is my body deciding with my brain what to do about a situation that might have a sense of threat, right? I don't decide to dread an ambiguous, difficult, boring task, right? I might not even notice, in fact, now with the talk, I would notice if I decided not to do it. That would be a thing. But like, let's say that email, I go to start that email that I dread, and then I just find myself doing something else, right? I've trained myself at this point in my life to notice out of the corner of my eye that turn away, right? I've watched for it. But nobody modeled that for me as a kid. Nobody taught me that in school. And so, like, if your kid is failing to do something, right, you understanding how to approach it and what to ask them and how to help them find the what is hard, you're already more knowledgeable than like my parents were able to be when I was a kid. Maybe they're forgetting, right? That absolutely does happen, but more likely they're motivated to avoid the task and just need some help getting through what the no is. So if anybody has, first off, if anybody wants to learn more about this, in addition to the slides, I also have a massive list of sources, but in addition to that list of sources, at the beginning of the doc, there's like hey, here's some more you can learn about this stuff. And it's sorted by how nerdy it is. So like, there's like really person friendly stuff. There's also like pretty intense stuff. So if you want to learn more about this stuff, I think, again, the brain is so fascinating and so cool. And so feel free to check that out. If you have questions, we can do them now. We actually finished on time. Amazing. And you can also email me, or you can go to my website or whatever if you want to either tell me that you saw a really good cat belly and did decide to pet it, or if you have questions. So I've been keeping an eye on the chat. I think, yeah, cool. I didn't miss anything in the chat. So if people have questions, Kristen or Caroline, how do you prefer that people do that? Chat, unmute, raise hand? I'm cool with whatever.
Yes, people can raise their hand or speak out, or they can put them in the chat. I did just put in slides. So if you wanted to download them right away, because you can't wait to look at it and refresh it and keep all this information in your working memory so you can process it, you can download her slides and resources, but they will also go out with the, when the recording goes out, that will also be on that. But thank you so much, Mike. That was amazing. And just really understanding. I'm just, so many examples in my head. It completely explains, I feel like, every morning and nighttime routine ever about why there's so much resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to, I was thinking about motivation, and I've often said motivation's a feeling. That's why we can't rely on it to do things. But you've taught me that motivation isn't a feeling. It's actually determined by feelings, among other things.
Yeah.
But I think that's such a helpful way of thinking about it. And so I've been really, I just had so many examples flooding my brain of what I've seen in my own home, and then also what I've seen in my practice. It makes a lot of sense to pause and slow down and try to figure out how to do these things. This is not about, again, knowledge. It's not about not knowing what to do, but it's about trying to, I think, strip the avoidance. So I guess I was trying to think about, like, sometimes we get the big no, right? And it is like explosive. And so I was trying to figure out, like, okay, well, if it's the huge no, is that this combination of a disinterested task and something that's, like, I was trying to think of, like, what makes that boulder so big? And how do we, like, in a way, as parents, can we predict or can we prepare things in a way so that we get less of that pushback?
Yeah. And like, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, and some of it is knowing your kid, right? And knowing what kinds of things or what sort of internal states, in which internal states they are most likely to, like, have a big no, right? Or to not feel able to problem solve, right? So like, work with a high schooler who, like, when there's writing to be done, she knows she's going to fight it. She's going to want to fight it. She's not going to want to start. She's not going to want to do it. She's going to want to wander away. And what she has figured out is that in order to get past that sort of like ambiguity of like, what's she going to say? How's she going to say it? Blah, blah, blah. She writes garbage to start, a paragraph or two of like utter garbage. And then her brain will click into editing mode and she's good. She's good to go. Right. But she has to remember, for her, it was about figuring out like, writing is going to be a challenge. I know I'm going to need to put some like bumper guards in the bowling, like a bowling alley to keep the ball. It's like, okay,
Right.
let's see, I'm going to want a body double. I'm going to want to like block out time. I'm going to like, I need to make myself face it. And then in order to still actually start and not just sit there and stare at it, write garbage, right? So knowing what's hard for your kid, knowing again, in what context. So like, if you have noticed that your kid absolutely pitches a fit about homework when they first get home, like, cool, something about their internal context, whether it is tired, whether it is hungry, whatever, that is not going to be the moment at which they have the most ability to say yes, right? So helping them spot patterns that they can't necessarily spot themselves, right? Even like more adults with ADHD will struggle with like spotting those patterns sometimes without like an external mirror of sorts to like help. My husband used to tell me he wasn't hangry when we first started, before he was my husband. Sweet, he thought that. He was hungry. He was always hangry. Right? Not always, but right. And like it took a while, and it took some like external feedback gently given that like for him to figure it out. That's very normal. Do other people have questions or Caroline, do you have more? I don't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
Yeah. No, please. I would love for the audience to kind of jump in and see if they had any questions. I know that the other thing that struck me about some of the things that you were talking about was a couple of times I think you referenced, I think a lot of times the advice is make things immediate and make things visual, right? So that visual, what that's telling me is that when we make things more visual, it lessens the tax on the working memory.
Yeah.
And it might lessen the overall like effort that you have to put forth. So I was thinking about that. And the same thing with having an immediate reward. Like, again, if you can't see it, right? If it's too far away, you can't visualize it. And so you need it right away, which is why that like frequent reinforcement, immediate reinforcement is like one of the number one things that we want to do, which can sometimes just be praise and attention. It doesn't mean you're just giving a Skittle every time they do something.
Yeah.
But it always helps because parents will be like, yeah, if we go out for ice cream, man, they know how to get dressed right away. Right? Like they know all the steps, they know all the sequences, but like, man, if we have to go to soccer and they're tired, they like, again, that motivation is like, again, because it feels very effortful. Like sometimes I think inertia, right? Just moving from the state that you're in seems too effortful.
Yes.
And I feel like that's could be part of that motivation.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you said something good and it fell out of my brain. Meow, I know. What was it? Can you say what you said at the beginning of that again?
I don't know. It might have fallen out. Well, it's the visual and it's the visual and immediate is kind of what I was talking
the immediate
about.
Thing. A lot of times, like for a long time, one of the accommodations for ADHD kids has been like, oh, it's okay if they turn in work late. And actually what's a lot more helpful is having more little deadlines along the way, because like a paper that's due in a month and doesn't have a deadline, the reason they can start it the day before is because of the immediacy of that deadline. So if you give them, but at a certain point, papers are too big to do as an all-nighter the night before, right? So like, giving them like, okay, this is the deadline for your topic. This is the deadline for that, right? Having more deadlines, more touch points, more concrete steps actually is more helpful in terms of outcomes than just being flexible with deadlines, which then takes away the only immediate piece of that, you know?
And even better might be to give them credit for each step along the
Yes,
way instead of only getting credit at the very end.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Don't be shy. Anyone kind of say, wow, this makes sense for me and my kid? Or this will help me when XYZ happens?
I think it's helped me see a lot of the tools that I've seen coaches and therapists recommend over the years has this brain basis. Like a lot of
Hmm.
times it sounds like just break that big task into smaller pieces. Well, of course that works. I know it works, but I never really thought about it from a brain basis, helping take that emotional impact out and all of that. And we know that people with ADHD are more emotionally triggered. So it all makes so much sense.
Yeah, right. Like,
Yeah.
to me, it also helps explain some of the gap between like, this shouldn't work cognitively. It doesn't feel like it should work. But it does. It does have a big impact, right? Like body doubling is witchcraft. It is so much more. For those of you who don't know, body doubling is just having another person either online or in the same room as you doing their thing while you do your thing, but you have both stated to each other or in a chat or whatever, like what it is that you're working on in that time. And it sounds like it wouldn't be that helpful, but it is crazy effective. It is crazy effective. And part of it is the clarity of this is what I'm going to work on, this is what I'm going to start with. Part of it is that social connectedness piece that makes you able to face the scary thing because the tiger won't eat you if you have your friend with you. Like, it's wild. It's absolutely wild.
We do have a hand raised.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anna?
Hey, my name's Vaughn. Hi.
Um, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I uh was just recently diagnosed with ADHD, like severe ADHD, and my 5-year-old has ADHD as well. At what point for my 5-year-old, uh, I understand the rewards, the gamifications, etc. But like, what's the difference between bribery and reward? Like, especially for that age, like, right? Like,
I feel like
can you
that's
help
like,
me that part?
yeah, yeah. It's funny. I feel as qualified to answer that in a real manner as I do, like, what is the true religion? Like, oh no. But also like there's some interesting research around like, external rewards and external motivations and internal rewards, this, that, and the other. And so I think I would say the guiding, sir, it's my turn. You can explain in a minute. Sorry, talking to my cat who is meowing in case that's not coming through. I'm not just having a moment. So, the guiding idea here is that eventually we want, as humans develop, we want them to find ways of connecting to the feeling of reward of doing something, and to bribe ourselves as necessary when something that we don't connect with any intrinsic value of it. Like, we just need to get through it anyway. That tends to be like my sort of guiding value, right? And so like it might mean things like early on explaining the sort of like, we have natural consequences instead of punishment in some cases. Mm-hmm. Natural consequences can also be rewards in the sense that like, yeah, like if you clean up your, like, we could go to the park today. If you clean up your Legos, right, then we'll be ready to go. As like an example off the top of my head, right? Versus, hey, if you clean up your Legos, we could go to the park. Like, right? One is like, here's the goal. This is the thing that gets us there, right? That's a sort of subtle thing. I think feeding your kid a Skittle for every math problem, like, might be like an intermediate step, but then building up to like, okay, how was that? Help your kid reflect on what they did well. Help your kid notice what worked for them. Some of that is actually conversations around the good parts of something So brains have a tendency to remember negative information more than positive information. That makes sense. If you think about, like, I was out, I'm an early human, and I was out and I saw a cave that has a scary bear, and I saw a bush that has delicious berries. It's more important that I avoid the bear than that I remember where that bush was. So my brain is more primed to remember the location of danger than the presence of reward, right? So in ADHD brains, it is really helpful for us to help them reflect back, because they really don't want to do that, on what worked, what was good. Like, how did you feel afterwards? What did you like about it?
Wow.
Like, sometimes it's actually, the reward is like the pieces that some brains might automatically catch as reward. We don't catch it, I'm not going to give you like the ultimate parenting thing. Obviously my cat, like, I'm doing a terrible job raising my cats not to interrupt. So, like, in terms of the big capital T truth, but does that help at all in terms of, like,
Yes.
how to think about it? Okay.
Yep. Yep. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else?
Or if
I
anyone
know
else
my brain's going to be like,
yeah.
going to be processing all of this for a long time and thinking about all the different ways that I can apply it in my own life and also in my practice. So I'm very excited to have all of that information. So thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for generously offering the slides and the resources. I am in love with all of your different analogies. I think all of a sudden I'm like, wait, maybe I too can understand neuroscience. So I really appreciated all the different ways that you kind of were able to map out the brain in a way that makes sense.
It's a pleasure and an
it's
honor.
visual, right? It's
Yeah.
not just the words, mumbo jumbo. You made it really visual. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Like, I really believe that, when you take away the Latin and when you build up from the bottom, right? Neuroscience and other, like, high level sciences, it's not that they are hard, it's that typically there's just a barrier in the way. And so, like, if anybody wants to learn, like I said, in that references doc, there is like a list of some very approachable sources that I really like. The information is high quality, but they won't scare you with Latin, or if they do, they will then have a laugh at, I don't think any of them refer to like Leia buns or chicken nuggets in your head, but same level of scariness, if you will. So yeah, I feel like it's really good to be able to approach that kind of stuff. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight. So we have these parent meetings every Tuesday, second Tuesday of the month. They're all online at ADHDKC.org, so you can go there. There's also the ADHD Conversations podcast, which will also, if you want to get more of what Mike has to say, there is a podcast where she's also sharing more information. I don't know about you, but I often like to hear things more than once. So Kristen, do you have anything else you want to add to finish us?
No, I think this was very insightful and helpful for understanding complex stuff in a way that I think is understandable and brought techniques to life. So very good. And I do see lots of new faces today. So thank you all for coming, and for those who are returning as well. But it's always good to see new faces. Thank you all. And we probably all need to get kids to bed or eat or do whatever we need to do, finish the dishes. All those tasks that we want to put off, but they are necessary. So,
yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.